Bonsoir tout le monde. Bienvenue. Welcome everyone. My name is Perry Francis. On behalf of the Alliance Française, I'm delighted to welcome our members, our students, friends, and the Atlanta community to tonight's event. Alliance Française is Atlanta's premier French-American cultural center. We offer educational, cultural, and social programs. We're part of the largest network of French language and cultural centers in the world. We've been in Atlanta since 1912 and offering French language since 1963. Our mission is to promote French language and culture and to foster friendship between Atlantans and the French-speaking world. Tonight's event is a perfect example of the types of partnerships, friendships, and community building that we're about at the Alliance Française. We have some wonderful programs and events. Upcoming on November 17th, we will have our 10th annual wine festival at the Goethe Institute in Colony Square in partnership with the Swiss Consulate and the German Cultural Center. And this April, we will be offering for the second time our April in Paris tour, which focuses on the jazz and African American expatriate experience in the City of Lights. I'm tickled we have the opportunity to have such events. I'm a part of that living legacy of France's relationship and appreciation for Black artists such as Josephine Baker and Catherine Dunham. My father is an expatriate jazz musician who's been living in Paris since the 80s, which is how I came to have such a love for French language and culture and all things jazz and French. Although tonight's event is free, due to the generous support of our sponsors, we are accepting donations so that we can continue to offer you and to provide such events such as this one to our community. We are also accepting members. If you are a former member, we'd love to welcome you back and tell you about some changes and some new things that are happening at the Alliance Française. And if you are not a member, please consider joining us. You do not have to speak French, or maybe you'd like to brush up on your high school or college French, or perhaps learn some new skills before joining us on one of our many trips. Or just participate in social events like the Wine Festival or cultural programming like tonight's lecture. I would like to acknowledge members of the High, of First Congregational Church, and several dancers corps who are with us this evening. And I would also like to acknowledge the presence of distinguished historian and scholar from Emory University, Dr. Richard Long. This event would not have been possible without the Atlanta community, and we'd like to thank our media sponsor, WCLK 91.9 Jazz FM. Additional sponsorship was provided by several dancers corps. Of course, we'd love to thank the High Museum and its staff and members for hosting us, and most especially our primary sponsor, First Congregational Church. I would like to especially acknowledge our board officer and First Congregational member, Terry Vismail Morris, without whom this wouldn't have come about. Here to introduce our speaker, I'm delighted to have the Reverend Dr. Dwight Andrews. Reverend Andrews, many of you may know as senior pastor of First Congregational Church. He holds a Master's of Divinity and a PhD in music theory from Yale University, and since 1994 has been a professor of music theory at Emory University, where he teaches the history of jazz and sacred music in the U.S. He was the first Quincy Jones Visiting Professor of African American Music at Harvard University and received the Pew Trust TCG Artist Residency Fellowship and Emory University's Distinguished Teacher Award. He also served as the musical director for Broadway productions of Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, Joe Turner's Come and Gone, The Piano Lesson, Seven Guitars, and worked with Kenny Leon, Sean P. Diddy Combs, and Felicia Rashad on a new production of A Raisin in the Sun. I'm pleased to give you the Reverend Dr. Dwight Andrews.
Good evening, and as you will soon see, he speaks very little French. Happy to see all of you here. I do want to acknowledge Dr. Long, who perhaps should be the one to do this introduction because he is so fluent in French culture and is always returning from Paris from one trip or another. But we're delighted to see see you, Dr. Long, and to all of my colleagues and friends, we're happy to have you here this evening. As many of you know, I am the scholar artist in residence at the High Museum, and we create programs that coordinate with many of the exhibitions. We just completed the Civil Rights exhibition, and we presented a musical concert of jazz reflecting music from the Civil Rights era. And even though I don't speak French, I am interested in all things French. And of course, the development of the history of jazz is in large part based on French culture and extensions of French culture through places like New Orleans and through the Caribbean. I'm also here because there's so much of African American and African culture that has a strong French base, and one that we should more fully explore. And so I think this is a kind of first step at that. So we're delighted to see all of you here, and it is my great pleasure to introduce our panelist tonight, our presenter tonight, Patrice Bensard, director of the Cinémathèque de la Danse, a native of Boulogne-Billancourt, France. After studying philosophy at the Sorbonne and psychoanalysis at the Université de Vincennes, Bensard became fascinated with cinema, photography, and dance. He started writing articles for cinema as well as pieces on dance after co-founding in 1979 the magazine Ambiente, the first periodical dedicated to contemporary dance. During the 1970s, Bensard worked as an assistant in New York along with Marc Ribot, Jan Barry, Eric Lessing, and Leonard Freed. This first trip to New York was the start of a fine and close relationship with the world of dance. In 1982, while he was artistic director of the Cinémathèque Dance Festival and he was entrusted with the task of setting up and directing La Cinémathèque de la Danse as part of the Cinémathèque Française. Igor Eisner, then dance inspector for the Ministry of Culture, and Constantine Costa-Gavras, the chairman of the Cinémathèque Française, assigned him this wonderful challenge. Patrice Bensard has also produced a number of dance-related films, including La Mystère Babiller and a portrait of the American choreographer Lucinda Childs, which was dedicated to these two great dance icons of the 20th century, respectively, Jean Babiller and Lucinda Childs. He was named Chevalier des Arts and des Lettres in 1996 and Chevalier de la Légion d'honneur in 2004. It is my great pleasure to welcome Mr. Patrice Bensard. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you so much. I feel shy with what you told about me, and it's like it was happening to somebody else. But okay, I hope the lecture I will try to do in English tonight, and the films, the clips, I hope so for some of them you don't know them maybe, and I hope you will like it. So I will go from this microphone to the other one. I push this one. First, I would like to say that I'm very honored to be in this city. I lived in New York a long time ago, and I go very often to New York, but I've never been to Atlanta, and as it is a moment in the life of America where you have a new president, I was very touched. I must stay quiet because I'm French, I'm not American, but of course, your new president is very popular in France, as you may know. And also I was very touched today that we have been at the Museum of Martin Luther King, because he's a figure that was very, very important for young people in France, in Paris, and when he died, it was really a shock in France for all the fights he made in his life. So, thank you to the Alliance Française also, and to all of you. This evening will be, of course, dedicated to jazz and to different figures which are not completely jazz, but on the side of jazz and variety, or jazz and something else. We will see that with Mrs. Dunham later. To begin, I would like to say that, as you know probably, jazz has been extremely important in French culture. It came to France and to Paris after the First World War with Afro-American soldiers that were part of the American army. And as soon it came to Paris, and this is very mysterious for me because the life in Paris was not the same than now. And as soon as the jazz came, people, writers as Cocteau, as Blaise Cendrars, and painters, of course, like Picasso, Matisse, many, many others, became fanatic of the new rhythm, of this new rhythm, of the new age of the jazz. Between the two World Wars, the big event in Paris, and I always will remember my father talking to me about it because he was at the premiere at le Théâtre des Champs-Élysées in 1925, was La Revue Nègre. What we call the Revue Nègre was Black Review, coming to Théâtre des Champs-Élysées. Théâtre des Champs-Élysées is a place where ballets russes have been dancing. It is one of the most beautiful theater in Paris. In 1925, with Josephine Baker. And this, for the people, for the audience, my father was not a musician, but it was such a strong effect on the audience that in one night, we say in France that Josephine Baker became completely famous. And she stayed famous until she died. And she was a dancer, she was a singer, we will see a little bit later, but also she was a figure of a woman free. She was very free in her life. She had many lovers, and she was somebody unpredictable. And the French people loved her. They adopted her immediately. So we will begin this evening by a film which is probably the first jazz film. Why it is? Because it is very seldom footages of a dance called the Cakewalk. And a few coincidences in my life made me think that the Cakewalk was a story unconsciously bound to my tastes and my personality for some reasons I ignore. First, a long time ago, at the French Film Archives, viewing all the French Lumière footages still preserved. Lumière was the first filmmaker. There were two brothers Lumière. They invented the cinematograph, movie theater, and they were living in the city of Lyon. They invented the moving pictures in 1895. And I discovered these incredible footages, so beautiful filmed, so clear, so flashy. You will see them later. And that was the Cakewalk, just arriving in Paris from some city of the United States. This was filmed in 1902. Some months later, I found a book of one of my favorite writers, Jean Cocteau, who loved so much jazz also, and he was part of all the avant-garde. This French book is called Portrait Souvenir. It is dated 1935, and it is a number of portraits of famous artists that Cocteau met when he was a very young man, but also performances, theater pieces he discovered as a child when his parents took him to musical. When the show that he saw with his parents, or the things he met later, the people he met, mesmerized him, he said that he suddenly was feeling like a little death, a petite mort inside him. He was saying in this book that exceptional circumstances provoked to him a little death, an exquisite anguish, a complex mixture of fear and beauty, an exceptional and unpredictable dream. In this book of 1935, he tells us in one chapter his very far memories of a show he saw in his childhood. In 1902, he was 7, and this was also the Cakewalk, danced in a musical called Le Nouveau Cirque, which was in Paris, Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré. This experience gave him, he said, the little death in his mind. And when I read the text by Cocteau, I immediately understood he was speaking, collecting his memories about the same Cakewalk dancers' performance filmed by the camera the same year by les Frères Lumière, by the Lumière brothers. So we have on one side the text by Cocteau, and on the other side the film by Lumière that you will see. This was also one of the first dance presentations that Cocteau saw in his life, and as we know later, Cocteau was part of Les Ballets Russes by Diaghilev, great friend and admirer of jazz music and dancers, especially when he went in 1936 in Harlem. So we understand how much Cakewalk must have been important to him. Cakewalk had been the first performance coming in 1902 to Paris with a troupe, a company, composed by Afro-American artists and white performers together. And this is for me a first question. Had these people performed in America before going to France and then after to Europe? This I don't know because there's a very few information about this group. These white performers were called the Elks, E-L-K-S. It was also the name of the whole group. Briefly, you know that Cakewalk was a dance of the black slaves on the plantation of southern United States. Sometimes the masters would allow them to borrow long coats and top hats which they used to make a caricature of their owners in a kind of sarabande which was redolent of the formal dances of the period. As a reward, the best among them would receive an enormous part of cake, which made the name the Cakewalk, and also, don't forget that in a way this dance was the ancestor, the origin of jazz dance. Now I will read to you some lines of the text by Cocteau, and after we can compare this to the film we will see. Cocteau says, that was the Nouveau Cirque, the place where Cakewalk was danced, when I was 7, and that same Nouveau Cirque became, in 1902, the scene of a historic theatrical event, the arrival of American rhythm. Rapidly, the Cakewalk blew everything else away, and beside it, everything paled. The spotlights lit Le Nouveau Cirque, the silken banners in American colors unfurled to the right and left to the doors. The first blacks presented the solemn cake, a wave of elegance. Women covered in pearls and feathers filled the stands. Men with monocles, with screw cuts or shining skulls. the brass and the drums of the orchestra attacked an unknown piece of music, the rhythm of which reminds us of the marches that Sousa conducted and punctuated by gunshot, the spotlights like ballerinas dancing and around the line of blue riders, and the elks appeared. Nothing was comparable to this show. Not everybody can be a star. Sometimes spotlights literally burn the poor souls and underline their loneliness. Rare are the artists who shine in the limelight. Mr. and Mrs. Elk were diamonds and stars. The audience stamped their feet with impatience, and right in the middle of the delirious crowd, Mr. and Mrs. Elk danced. Lean, crooked, covered in ribbons, star-studded, splashed with white lights, their hats tilted on one side over their eyes and ears, knees higher than their faces. This is exactly the cakewalk. Thrown back, hands swinging flexible canes, dancing freely and pounding an artificial floorboard with the taps of their patent leather shoes. They danced, arched their backs, broke their backs in two, in three, in four, stood upright, and finally bowed. And following their example, the whole city of Paris, the whole of Europe started to dance. Their rhythm seized the new world before seizing the old, and then seized machines and bounced back to human beings, and there was no end to it, and the elks died, but dead or alive, the procession continued its dance, led by little canes and by the ribbon-covered skeletons of the elks. This was Cocteau. And if Cocteau's description touched me deeply, it is because it is a perfect evocation of how one imagines this show to have been. And if it is this accurate, it's because of the style, a style which Cocteau often used, which is that of speech, with its muffled voice, its inflections, its particularly rhythm. Cocteau literally illumines this dance, stages the scene, gives it a sparkling, fairy-like aspect that both frames it and immortalized it, but in a very different way from a film. The very strange thing with the text of Cocteau is that he speaks about the elks, who were the white dancers, but he doesn't speak about the young kid, the wonderful young kid you will see. And this is probably his memory that so long after did not remember this part of the dance. The magical little black dancers that will appear on the screen in a few moments, who were they? It still remains a mystery for me and for different people. Who was this company of dancers who Cocteau and the Lumière brothers called the elks? This is the second mystery. This company, made up of blacks and white dancers, had crossed the Atlantic, that much we know, in 1900, 1901, too. That much we know from the text of the period. But in the United States, the historians consulted did not recognize the name the Elks. Friends conducted research, and in fact, the Elks were never really a troupe of dancers in America, but the name of a Masonic lodge. The only explanation is that these dancers took this name when they arrived in France, and the little dancers were nicknamed at that time the Pickaninnies, which was the name given to cotton pickers in the southern fields, but later this word became a terrible and bad racist insult. To conclude this talk, which above all seeks to pose several questions, I would say that in between Cocteau's text and the Lumière brothers' film, if I must choose the medium that gives the best account of the Cakewalk, I would very paradoxically choose Shame on Me. It is a paradox I'm aware of. I would choose Cocteau's text because he so perfectly places the spirit of this dance, sublimating it to such a degree that he attains a vertiginous plateau that is truer than truth itself. And in fact, I occasionally ask the question, second paradox, could the camera, which nonetheless records everything in dance, fail to fix the snow-like silence, the secret halo which is also perhaps at the heart of dance, the stillness of dance, of which the poet T.S. Eliot speaks, where death breathes at the same moment life expires, sometimes provoking from time to time the return of the little death that Cocteau strived so fervently to rediscover, and which probably never allows itself to be captured on film. And now, after all these words placed to the image, let's see the elk and the pickaninnies dancing the Cakewalk au Nouveau Siècle. It's a very funny coincidence. It's another coincidence about this cakewalk that about 10 years ago I went to the flea market in Paris, and I was trying to find, I did not know, I was searching for something to find, if I can say. And suddenly, it's true, it seems bizarre, but I had the absolute idea I will find something about these people, these performers of the cakewalk. And I found about 30 cards, postcards, made at the same moment that the film was made, of all these performers, and each time with the name of the figure of the dance. So in French, it was made in French. So I put at the end of the excerpt this carte postale, because I thought it was really strange and very, very nice, because we will never know, I think, who were these little performers. And I think they look so cute because they look very natural. They don't seem shy, and they seem to do what they want to do on the stage, which is incredible, I think. The next excerpt is a story interesting because you probably know who was Jean Renoir, a French filmmaker. Some of you maybe know him. He was a very, very famous French filmmaker, and he made beautiful films. And after a time he was living in Paris. At the time of the war, he had to escape France because he was politically very much on the left. So he went to live in Hollywood, and he made films in Hollywood with a great success. Well, we are in 1925, and Jean Renoir made a film called Nana, silent, of course. I must add that the music we put in the silent movie is cakewalk music that we found in Paris, called the Cakewalk. So I think the music must have been very close from this music we put on the film. Anyway, about the Jean Renoir movie, he made a failure with this film called Nana, and he had some reels that he did not use to film. So he kept the reels. And his wife, that you will see on the screen, was a very beautiful young woman called Catherine Essling, that he loved very much. And she was very, very good friend with an American dancer, a black dancer called Johnny Higgins. Johnny Higgins was part of the Revue Nègre, this review that came in 1925, and he decided, because he loved Paris and because he loved the French people, he decided to stay in Paris, to live in Paris. And then Jean Renoir and his wife saw him very often, and almost every night they went to jazz concert with him. So Jean Renoir decided not to make a film, but to make a, like we say, a short film about his wife dancing the Charleston with Johnny Higgins. So let's see that. It was called Charleston, or Sur un air de Charleston. Johnny Higgins and Catherine Essling. is funny, this film, because of course Jean Renoir took the Charleston as a dance, but also as a kind of divertissement for his wife. And I think it's filmed with a very wonderful tenderness. The next performer, the next person, the next star we will admire is Josephine Baker. As I told you, she came 1925 with La Revue Nègre in Paris. She learned a lot from Johnny Higgins, a lot of steps of dance, and she was probably her strength was that she was not completely a dancer. She was also a clown, we can say. And in these documents, you will see the way her face is moving, the way she looks sometimes even a little bit like Charlie Chaplin. She liked very much Charlie Chaplin, and she liked movies very, very much. Why she became so famous? I would say because she was also very sexy. And in a way, in Paris at that time, the life was very different of now, of course. And to have this woman dancer coming from America and in this very free life, free way, the Parisian people liked it very much. Also, as I said, she was very involved with the Parisian life. And we must remember that, for instance, she was nude in different films. At that time, it was not obvious for a lady to be nude. And she was never shy because she was beautiful and she has a way to be nude, very strong. But politically, it became a big problem. And in 1930, when she went to Vienna, in Austria, the Nazi party made an enormous demonstration against her. It means that, of course, it was not completely innocent what she was doing, especially at that time. So now we will see Josephine Baker dancing and playing. This is the oldest document, film. 1 year after she arrived in Paris, she was dancing, and you can see the banana. Cocteau made a drawing one evening when he was having dinner with her, and he told her you have to wear a belt with banana, artificial bananas, of course. So you can see that. And it became very, very famous. So the quality is not excellent, as you see, but you can see the way she was moving. What a great mover. What a great mover. I'm sorry with my English, maybe I make some mistake. This was a benefit evening, and she went on the ring, as you can see. It was not prepared, I think. This is silent. And these are the feathers of the Revue des Folies Bergères. This is a long feature movie, it's a part of it, called Zuzu.
Mais comment pouvez-vous résister? Et dansez, voyons. Vous savez bien comme l'autre soir. Dansez. Et dansez donc, voyons.
Mm-hmm. And this, no, there's still one document with Josephine Baker. This one is painted by hand in color, and it was a tableau, sequence of a review she made around 1927 in Paris. And there's a very famous jazz man from America, Sidney Bechet. He's very, very famous in France because he stayed also in Paris. He lived in France, and he is beyond the musicians. So this is La Plantation. Yes, he was so beautiful and so strong and so gifted. And each time I see these documents, I feel the same. I'm each time completely mesmerized by this personality. The last figure I would like to honor, because I met her quite often at the end of her life, is Mrs. Catherine Dunham. Madame Catherine Dunham. She was born in Chicago, but at the end of her life she was in East St. Louis, and she spent a long part of her life in East St. Louis. East St. Louis is a part of the area around St. Louis, and I decided one summer, because I knew she was making a workshop, and she was already very old, to go and meet her. And then I had no ideas where was East St. Louis. I thought it was a city different from St. Louis. But finally I found my way, and when you wanted to meet her and to go and find her, there was always a way to meet Madame Dunham. She was somebody quite mysterious, I must say, and at the end of her life she was staying in bed most of the time because she could not walk, and you could ask her questions. She was not answering questions, but she was playing with the little stones and little shelves all the time, and I was very surprised because I did not understand what she was doing when I was speaking to her, and trying to have a conversation. And she was very nice to me, but, difficult to understand what she was doing. Somebody later told me, an anthropologist told me that this thing with the little stones were part of the Vodou custom. And this brings me to speak about her life. Catherine Dunham was first an anthropologist. She was a very good student, and she had the possibility to make a trip in a Caribbean island to write a book about different dances of Caribbean. So she went to Martinique and different islands like that. And in the same time, she began to film also. She had a little camera, 16 millimeters camera, and she was filming the different dances and styles of dance. But the most important experience to her was in Haiti, because she loved the country, and also because she began very, very involved with the Vodou. And for her, the Vodou was something really important. She was not talking about it. She felt it was a very positive thing and not a bad thing to practice Vodou, and she had been initiated. And in her life, in her artist life, what she did was to transpose Vodou rituals in a way to the stage. Of course, she made some change, but it will be explained in the documentary, part of a documentary you will see. And after the war, this is the part with France, she came to Paris with her group of dancers, and it was like Josephine Baker before the war. Catherine Dunham made an enormous success. She came back almost every year to dance and with her company. And she loved to be in France. She loved to be with the people there, the artists. And even Cocteau, once again Cocteau, was saying about her, this, I think it's very funny, if we wrote with our pens what Catherine Dunham expresses with her legs, our text would be banned. This is very Cocteau. So you will see a part of a television program called Divine Drums, which was very popular in America. And later in this film, there's different sequences. You will see her dancing, of course. And at the end, she was in East St. Louis and in Haiti. She came back to Haiti for different political reasons, because she was very, very engaged politically for the civil rights and for different causes. But she was also teaching, even if she was in an armchair, a wheelchair, I mean, and she was teaching to young students of East St. Louis, which is quite a poor community. And she was somebody also with incredible strength. She died at 100 years old, and she still is for me one of the person I met who gave me the more strong feeling about somebody really stronger than life itself. She was incredible. And I hope this little film will give you the idea of whom she was.
In Catherine Dunham's United States of 1936, the limit of what the black dancer could achieve is known as Negro Dance.
Well, if you were a black dancer, all you could aspire to was to be a shake dancer or a tap dancer or a contortionist or an acrobat, because that's all that was open to you.
We needed to see another vision of what black dancers could do. The black dancer did not have a choice. Maybe if they were my skin color or maybe a little bit lighter, they might be able to get into the chorus line. They could not be in any of the evolving concert stage because they were black. They were between a rock and a hard place, literally.
I had gained enough knowledge in the West Indies that I knew that I was doing some things from a point that was quite different from what the average person would see when he went to the theater or a rehearsal.
When Dunham returns to Chicago, she realizes that new choreography will have to wait. She must first teach her dancers the movements she's experienced and their spiritual dimension. She tells her company they'll learn the steps of the gods.
When she came back from Haiti, it was quite a revelation because we found ourselves doing things that did not even seem to me like dance anymore. There were a lot of voodoo movements and pelvic movements that our families were horrified when they saw us doing. A whole different concept of dance because we learned the spiritual part of the dance.
In time, these movements become the foundation of an approach to dance known as the Dunham technique, based on the principle of isolation.
She formed this incredible movement system, and that is still prevalent today, although she's not given credit for it.
You learn to move each part of your body separately, as though it has no connection with the other part of your body.
The movement of the head, the snap of the finger, the wiggle of the knees and legs. I don't think anyone ever mastered it as well as she did.
But of all the Caribbean movements Dunham teaches, the most exciting comes from the island of Martinique. There, men perform a fighting dance called the Agia. A fusion of African and European combat styles, the Agia developed because slaves were not allowed to possess weapons. The Agia is martial art disguised as dance. As a tool, Dunham uses film she shot in Martinique to teach the dance to her company. She decides to build her first new choreography around the drama of the Agia. But Caribbean-inspired material is not all Dunham wants audiences to appreciate. All along, she sought to build respect for African-American themes as well. The chance to do this comes when the company is invited to New York City. In a new show for Broadway, Tropics and La Jazz Hot, she creates a duet she calls Barrel House Blues. It's based on the slow drag, a couple's dance common to the juke and the honky-tonk. The piece is controversial for audiences in 1940.
The critics were just baffled. They were ignorant to the fact that this was a combination of the authentic with the artistic. So they reverted back to their safety of it was sizzling, it was hot, it was torrid, it was sexy, and all that business.
Though the reviews are enthusiastic, they're laced with a tone of condescension. John Martin, America's leading dance critic, calls Barrel House Blues an incredible vulgarity in the New York Times.
Like any innovator, you're bound to give your audience trouble, and Katherine Dunham did. What they saw, many a critic dismissed as cabaret. and they felt it had no depth. That wasn't true.
They were sassy, and she was courageous. She would always take risks.
Here's someone who said this is important, vernacular dance. The idea of looking at the blues experience in the body, the idea of looking at the jazz experience in the body, the idea of looking at the spiritual experience in the body through dance, that's a powerful legacy.
In 1943, she tangles with the director of the film Stormy Weather. Stormy Weather stars Bill Bojangles Robinson and Lena Horne, but it's Dunham who steals the show.
Of course, Lena's the star of Stormy Weather, but let's face it, when we pan away to Katherine Dunham and she stands with her 40s fashions, the hat tilted to the side of the head, one sees power.
But she actually has to negotiate her place and her sense of self and her sense of who the black dancer was in America at that point with the director of the film. He wanted the whole scene to be the hookers and pimps on the street. She says, no, nothing doing. All of a sudden, we're in another world, a dream world.
The Dunham Dance Company is one of the best-known dance groups in the world, and yet it is difficult keeping the troupe going.
The Dunham Company was characterized by the fact that it was constantly in a state of bankruptcy.
To pay the bills, the company tours constantly and performs in nightclubs and private functions. Celebrity is a mixed blessing.
We were traveling and performing in a time of extreme segregation.
But Dunham refuses to be intimidated. At every turn, she uses her fame to counter racism. Wherever she goes in the U.S., she tells the press about hotels which deny her accommodation. She rejects engagements before segregated audiences and speaks out on civil rights for Negroes, even during World War II, when some thought it unpatriotic.
Poi sciottiamo da rock black nero e torno che già desafiato.
Eh bien, voilà. Je ne sais pas si vous avez des questions à me poser.
So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, we're open for a question and answer portion.
As far as Josephine Baker, can you give us a framework of when Josephine was in France and what the French society, the condition of the French society, le malaise of when she comes on board? Yeah, just what were the cultural conditions? What was the conversation in France in terms of morality, puritanism, all that stuff? Because it seems like it's very... I'm a little shaken by the film, and I apologize, but this is just my reaction. But I feel that Josephine was romanticized. Anything that was outside of Europe, Africa, the Caribbean, it was this exotic, but it wasn't taken for its philosophical, spiritual, and historic context. That the West, that Europe at that time was looking, had a void. André Guy talks about it. Sorry. En fait, c'est un peu la déconstruction, c'est-à-dire c'est quoi la présence des Français et la France à cette époque-là.
Okay. Josephine Baker came at a very specific moment in France, not because she came, it's because La Revue Nègre came from America in 1925, and everybody knows that in 25 in Europe it was a moment between the two wars, which was a kind of joie de vivre. I don't know what you say it was a very strong moment for because the part of the economic crisis was over. It was before the beginning of the menace. What do you say, menace? The danger of the Nazi coming. So it was just a moment of this review which became a symbol of freedom in a way, because, thank you, because music and the dance that came with the Revue Nègre was, as the Cakewalk, nobody has seen this before. So the French people, in fact, something very magic arrived with Josephine Baker, because immediately, and the writer said that, in one night she became famous, and it's true, because immediately nobody knew about her, nobody knew who she was, nobody knew what was La Revue Nègre. But the people went because first this theater is a very, very famous theater in Paris, bound to the story and the adventure of the Russian ballet of Diaghilev. And also because they knew unconsciously that it was modern, that the modernity suddenly came from America, because America, of course, there was a mythology about American life, about American dream, about American performers. Then she arrived. Then the strength and the intelligence she had was, I think, for me, to keep a strength, even if she was doing variety. Of course she was doing variety. She was not doing really jazz. Sidney Bechet in the group made jazz, but she was doing something else. She was doing her own part, bound to what she was, bound to her culture, and she brought to French audience, popular audience, as well as a bourgeois audience. This is a mystery, because she was very charismatic. When you see her 1 second, you understand that everybody looks at her. You can't miss her, you know. It was, and she has this genius to be, I think, adapted to, you say adapted in English, to any kind of situation. She first of all was a very famous French writer fell in love with her. Then a very famous man was drawing, Paul Collin, fall in love with her. So all these men, of course, it was the 20s. She had a very free life also, and she played the game to be a variety artist. She couldn't say she was a really jazz singer, but when she sings, as you saw, for instance, Tahiti, she has an incredible voice, which is still now, when I hear this song, you know, I feel like that, because she had something completely particular, you know, as you have in America, so many wonderful singers, or, you know. The society in France was very open to the idea of the mélange des, je ne sais pas comment te dire, des cultures et des races, je ne sais pas dire des, mixing, yeah, because the writers, as I said, and the painters and the musicians, Ravel, Debussy, Darius Milhaud, they were all involved and inspired by jazz. So when jazz really came with jazz musicians, jazz dancers, I think the French audience was absolutely open to this idea. It gave to France, which is supposed to be the country of freedom, who invented the idea of equality between people of different races, it gave to French people the idea they were welcoming people of different culture. And I think the French people love this idea. During the war, it is known that she was, of course, because the Nazis were against races and black people, so she became, for de Gaulle, a kind of spy. We don't know exactly what she did for the resistance, but the legend or the reality said that she was a part of the resistance. I believe she was, because she was very courageous lady, very, very courageous, very bright. And she did not go to university. She was not like Catherine Dunham, but she knew anything. She could understand anybody. And also she had this very strong fight against racism, and this is why she invented the story to have all these kids. I don't know, this probably is known in America also, I don't know. In France it's very famous. She bought a castle, and she was still singing at that time. She was not anymore dancing, but she was a very, very beautiful singer. And she was making money to buy a castle in the south of France, le Château des Milandes, where she decided to adopt, you say adopt in English?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Kids of different religions and different races and different countries. And they became the kids of Josephine Baker. One of them became more famous than the others. Jean-Claude Becker was a restaurant in New York, a very bright man. He met Josephine a little bit older. He was about 16. He was bellboy at a Scribe Hotel in Paris when she came, because she was all the time going to this hotel. And he decided to have her as her mother, because he has no parents. He was un enfant trouvé. Oui.
Orphan.
Okay, yeah, orphan, absolutely. So, and then he went and he asked her to be a child, and she accepted in a way. So he has this restaurant in New York called Chez Josephine. But little by little, she had no more money to pay for the castle, to pay for the food. And it became really a disaster, because the people began to be a little bit, she became to be out of fashion. It's a cruel world, but it is like that. And the end of her life was sad. Some people helped her with money, but it was very, very difficult. And I think we can't judge her in a way, because of course she was making musical, this is what she was doing, this is what she knew, the way she could move and impress people and mesmerize people. She was a seducer, and she always she didn't want to play another part. She was playing her part, which was already a beautiful ambassador for another culture, Afro-American culture, and the French people knew about that. I think when she came back to America, it was difficult for her. I think she was very disappointed when she went to Harlem, I think, because the people were not so warm with her. They did not know exactly who she was anymore, because she quit America when she was completely unknown, and she came back famous. But so we have a very strong respect to her. And, I think, that, for instance, the excerpts, when we see her dancing at the end in color, she was incredible. She was doing things that you can't believe people was making on a scene at the time. Now everybody could make that, because we have postmodern dance and, avant-garde and things. But she was avant-garde artist completely, unconscious Picasso, a bit. She was, or Charlie Chaplin. So I don't know if I answer your question, by the way. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Because of course the French filmmakers took a bit advantage of her, because she was a star. But I think even in a scene like the one on the balançoire, Zouzou, when she sings Zouzou, the swing, even in this scene, she's absolutely not ridiculous. She's fantastic. And her voice is beautiful. You can't have something better in this time, I think. It's completely incredible. And I'm not saying this because I'm in America, but in Paris, when I show this film, the young people even, they're completely like that. And this is, what there was a writer, a French writer called André Gide. He was calling this the part of God. You can't explain it. The grace. You have the grace, or you don't have the grace. Well, she had the grace forever.
I find this fascinating. Because I hadn't seen some of those clips before. But I think if I were going to answer your question from a slightly different perspective, this film is very rich and helpful, because Josephine Baker becomes a kind of incredible celebrity entertainer. But this is a very complicated text, isn't it? Because the exotica that you see in her that she was so famous for in Paris was also a part of the exotic and the jungle music of the Cotton Club for white audiences. And there's an extraordinary performance art that mixed jazz and this notion of a kind of African primitivism, right? Kind of all things African, kind of mixed in with this idea of jazz as the jazz age. We're free. But it had a very strong racialized component to it. So in a sense, a black woman freely expressing herself physically with this highly syncopated jazz music, this wild abandon that you saw in that film, is really a great part of the jazz, complicated jazz story of the 1920s. Because jazz represents different things for different people in the 1920s. And for the white folks that came to the Cotton Club and saw these wonderful floor shows with these jazz orchestras and this highly syncopated music, it represented one thing. But for the blacks who danced that music but couldn't get in the Cotton Club, it represented quite another. And so I think it provides a rich platform to look at the way in which black women and black culture and music are portrayed in the media, because it really has a lot of levels, doesn't it? There's no question that she is a fantastic artist. I can't take my eyes off of her. But at the same time, in a sense, she was able to capitalize on this tremendously rich and complicated time in which Stravinsky and Diaghilev, if you think about the Rite of Spring, I mean, part of that was getting away from the 19th century and coming to a more kind of wild abandon in the music. And so it was affecting all of the artists and all things that were coming kind of age, this new sense of modernism. How black people fit into that is a wonderfully rich conversation. And I'm so grateful that you've brought this to us, because I think we could talk about it a lot.
Thank you, but I feel that you must know much more better than I do, all of you, about all these figures. But I thought it could be interesting for you to have somebody from France bringing you some footages, because we made tributes of Catherine Dunham, for instance, because people in France know the name of Catherine Dunham. She was so famous, but now nobody knew exactly who she was and the fights she had to do and the personality she had.